Hi, welcome to Always Andy's Mom, episode 335. Susan Luna is sponsoring today's episode in honor of Hunter Jackson Jaffe. Her episode originally aired episode 57, and then recently she was on again, episode 332, when she came on to discuss her journey 5 years down the road, as well as her new beautiful book, Look, Mom, I Can Fly. So we're so thankful for her support in memory of Hunter for today's episode. I'm Gwen Kapcia. Many of you who are listeners know me as someone who is on frequently with Marcy when we do live streams together. But for this episode and the one prior to this and two more ahead, we are just going to be doing some educational pieces about grief and a chance to do some teaching. So be sure, if you did not listen to last week's episode, to listen. It kind of just builds on the next. So last week we talked about why grief is so hard. And then today we're going to look at just some special factors that influence how we grieve, and then what the experts say we need in order to heal. Week 3, we'll look at some of the big obstacles and emotions with grief. And then week 4, we'll look at long-range goals for recovery. Now, I've heard it said, many times that we're all unique, right? Everybody's different, everybody's special. What makes me laugh and cry will never invoke the same type of laughter and crying in somebody else. And I'm so thankful that we're all different, right? What would this world be if we were all the same? There's many poems about the uniqueness of people, but I love this one especially. It says, "A God who loves rich variety created not simply a single tree, but trees of all kinds, trees of all sizes, and trees of all shapes. Let me see the vast variety in ways of mourning." That was by Edward Hayes, a contemporary spiritualist. I love that as much as there's variety in the world, if you look at, if you've ever watched the show Blue Planet on the National Geographic specials, they might look at birds or fish or just any part of nature, and butterflies, anything. And there's just such variety of colors and shapes. And I think it's just amazing. But the humankind, we're like that too. We're all unique and different, and we all are going to grieve. So your grief is just as unique as you are. It is just yours. But we do know that there are things that can influence it and kind of make its mark on it, right? So when you learn about animals, their environment influences them, the prey that seeks them influences them, and sort of things. So we have things that influence how we grieve and factor in. One of the things that I just want to say too about grief is that even though we may understand some of these factors, and you're going to have a better understanding after we talk today, it's still so much out of our control, right? Grief is a lack of understanding and a loss of control. I don't like to fly. I'm not afraid of it. I don't need to, take anxiety meds or anything to fly, but it's not my favorite because I don't understand aviation. So that last step, every time when I'm on the jetway, before I get onto that big hunk of metal, that last step, I'm always reminded, I don't get this. I don't know how this hunk of metal is going to lift up here. And in an hour and 47 minutes, I'm going to be there. And then I'm going to be traveling at 527 miles an hour. I don't get it. They don't let me fly the plane. They don't teach me. I can't see who's, oftentimes the cockpit was shut for many years after COVID. I'm like, who's flying this thing, right? Do they look at peace? Are they, it just bothers me. And I think grief is a lot the same way. We just have no understanding. We don't understand, how am I ever going to put my life back together? And the loss of control, that we didn't get to control what happened to us. So with this discussion today, though, I think it will help in our understanding of what factors have influenced. So it would kind of like me getting a lesson in aviation. And one time I was sitting next to someone, and they kept looking at their clock as we were landing, and their watch. And I'm like, and he said, well, I'm a pilot, and this is a habit. And so he taught me a little bit about landing and what happens. And ever since then, landings haven't had the same anxiety for me. So it did help with my understanding. Can I teach you it? No, because I just knew that at that moment it made me feel better. These factors are not my own. I did not write them. I'm using factors from Dr. Alan Wolfelt. You can read his books, Understanding Grief, Helping Yourself Heal. He's got many books in his Companion Press bookstore online at centerforloss.com. And the first one is the relationship with the person who died. Like, who was this person? And we have to look at what role they played in our life. What was the relationship like? Was there conflict? Were you close? Were you physically separated? I don't just work with bereaved parents. I also work with widow and widowers, children whose parents have died. I mean, all sorts of losses. But I was in a support group once with a couple different widows, and one woman said, I can't relate to this. And she said, you guys are talking about how hard it is to sleep and make decisions and be by yourself. She said, my husband was an over-the-road truck driver, and he was gone sometimes for 6-8 days at a time. And I'm used to sleeping by myself, making decisions, taking the kids to school, doing all that. So what factored in for her is she was way less physically connected to her husband. Now, emotionally, yes, she missed him very much, but doing those physical tasks or her daily life was not as effective as someone who maybe was very physically close. I mean, there's some people who go to the dentist on the same day. They ride to work together. So there's so much more to adjust to. What we know is the intensity of the relationship has a direct correlation to how intense the grief is. I just want to say here that not all relationships are loving. There can be conflict. There can be things that have caused a division in families. And ambivalence in relationships, there's a strong sense of maybe unfinished business, conflicts not resolved, or things left unsaid. And just knowing that not all relationships are loving, I want you to know that when there is conflict in the relationship, sometimes there can be a higher level of conflict in the grief. I'll use my mother as an example. So my mom came from just maybe a little rougher childhood, not some pleasant things. It wasn't as loving, maybe, as my dad came from a very loving family. His dad would take them out to the barn. He spent time with the boys all the time. And their dads died fairly close together the same year. And you would think that maybe it would be my dad that would have a more difficult time because his dad and him were very close and very loving. But it was actually my mom, because what happens is when somebody dies, we also lose the hope that they'd ever say they're sorry, that they'd ever tell you they're proud of you. She never heard, you've got what it takes, I believe in you. So we lose some of that. So that relationship and who this person was does factor in. The next one is the circumstances of the death. Now, if you listened last week, I mentioned the 5 circumstances of a death that can make it more difficult. And I promised that we would talk about it in a little more detail. The first one was sudden. And so is the death sudden or anticipated? And I get often asked the question, which one's worse? And the one thing I can tell you is the one that happened to you is the worst. There is no hierarchy with this. There's no pecking order. What happened to you is your worst, right? Now, with a sudden death, it can be so immediate, shocking, no warning, the surprise, the overwhelmness. There can be a sudden death after a brief period of maybe an interval where it looked like they were going to get better. Maybe there was an accident and you were told that they were at the hospital and that things were looking good, and then it's not. After a while, they do die, or you have to remove them from life support. There can be some trauma involved if you were involved in an accident. Were you detained by the police? Was there a chance for you to say goodbye, be involved? Just because a death is natural does not mean it's peaceful. If a human caused the event, it can be worse for the survivor if it was preventable. And the other thing that we have to look at is what else is happening at that moment. So I share this story frequently. Again, I said this last week, but I feel the need to say it again, that grief work's all I've ever done, which people might call me an expert, but really the experts are the families who have taught me. And because they have bravely allowed me to share their stories to teach you, I'm so grateful. So I have everyone's permission to share their story. I don't want you to ever think that if you shared something with me that I would turn around and use it in a public setting without asking your permission. But what else is happening at the time of a death? Sometimes there could be a fight going on, or maybe you just had a little bit of conflict and then that person dies. My example that I was going to share with a woman whose husband died, they would fish a lot, and she would hold the rope on the dock while he did what he needed to do with the motor of the boat, and then he'd tell her to jump in and off they'd go. Well, this particular day, she's holding the rope. It's very hot. She's standing there and she says something to him like, "Are we almost ready?" And he was kind of mumbling, and then she's like, "Quit mumbling. I can't hear you." And then she stood there and then she's like, "Why are you ignoring me? You're more concerned about that motor. You can't even answer me." And then she said, "I could just throw this rope and let you drift out into the water if you're more concerned about your boat than paying attention to me or what I'm concerned about." And then she realized that he was struggling, and he had suffered a heart attack, and he died slumped over the back of the boat. And he died while she was yelling at him. And she felt so horrible about that. Now, we'll talk about these big feelings later, but I just feel like I need to explain what I work through with her, is that in that 10-minute window, that was just such a small window of time of their whole relationship, that I had to help her in her perspective to look at the overall relationship and not just the ending, because sometimes the endings are bad, but that doesn't mean the whole relationship was. So I asked her, she said, "I can't believe I was yelling at him. I can't believe I was yelling at him. That's so horrible. I'm such a horrible wife. Why did I do that?" It was a very natural thing to do when you're standing there thinking someone's ignoring you and you're hot and they're not responding. It was a very natural thing for her to do. So I said, "How long were you married?" She said, 39 years. I said, "Get a big poster board and go to 39 people that know you and ask them to describe what kind of wife you were in just one or two words, and then get back with me." So she did. Nobody said she was a yeller. She didn't yell. So that helped her to look at the circumstances of that sudden death and what that was like. Anticipated. Many times people feel they can get a head start on their grief because they had anticipated a death after maybe an illness or a long journey. They do grieve a lot of losses that happen before a death. I have no doubt that they just, the person stopped driving, stopped coming to the table for meals, stopped communicating, whatever that is, and you've had all these losses, but you really can't ever anticipate what life is like without that person until they're gone. There can be, the long-term caregiving. There can be all of these things in the suddenness of a death. The next one is premature. Now, I just want to start with the fact that middle-aged people, someone 72, can die prematurely. If they were given a clean bill of health at their checkup and they die a week later, you're like, well, we weren't expecting that at all. I mean, they just said dad had the heart of a 17-year-old, and then they died. So that can happen. But what I do know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is it is never right for a child to die before a parent. No one ever has a child anticipating outliving that child, and there's no way to make that right. So if a sudden death is part of your story, that shocking trauma of a sudden death, and then it's your child, you have two of those factors right there. The next one is intense relationship, is, as we mentioned, how intense was the relationship, the caregiving, whatever that was, that could be a factor for you. The next thing that is a factor is if there's no body. And some people say, why is that, Gwen? Grief needs an object. We need to see something. How do I say this? I guess I can use my aunt as an example, that her son died in Vietnam, and he died in an explosion, and she got back a flag from the U.S. government with someone coming to her door saying, "We're sorry, but your son has died." She never saw his body again. She never had that object. There's a reason why in funeral service we restore bodies to the point that if someone if we're able, that they can see that person if that's a need of theirs, that we need that object. So, because sometimes if there's nothing, you just go, really, did that really happen? But in all grief, there's the why, why? Why did this have to happen? What did this mean? And I will tell you that if I said to you, I have an envelope today that I can email all of you your answer to your why questions, you'd be like, oh, that'd be great. I do want to understand that. But the truth is, you would still have all the pain that you have right now of not having your person, even if you understood why. So I mentioned unfinished business when talking about the circumstances, but an unfinished business is personal feelings not expressed, and unanswered questions are more unsettled manners to the relation to the death. Like, how did they end up there? I didn't know they were hanging out with those kids. Were they really drugs involved? Because I didn't know my child was involved in that. And the thing may be, who can answer these questions? And are you prepared for the answers? Some people need all those answers to all of that, to the why, to how did they end up there. They want to read police reports. They want to look at pictures. And other people do not need to do that. The real key is that the choice is yours for what you need. The best way I can describe that when looking at the circumstances of the death of sudden versus anticipated, in my years in hospice care, anticipated deaths, oftentimes if the family cared for the person at home or in a inpatient facility, a hospice house, when the death occurred, the family has the choice of whether they want to be involved in postmortem care. Like, many families stayed and helped and bathed and dressed, or, did their hair, put on, they just were able to give the care. But then there were some families who, when the death occurred, they called the hospice nurse and they went in the other room, and they weren't involved in anything. Neither one is wrong, but the choice was theirs, right? And that's the problem in a sudden death, when there's police or investigations or all that stuff going on. If there's crime scenes, if there's legal stuff, you don't always get that choice. And that's a hard pill to swallow, and I understand that. So the circumstances of the death: sudden, premature, violent, no body, the questioning, and then the intensity of the relationship. The next factor is the ritual or funeral service. There's a reason we've had funerals since the beginning of time. There really is. And I'd encourage you to read about that. Alan Wolfelt writes about it, but it's reality, recall, support, expression, meaning, transcendence. Like, we needed to have them. And the ritual, it's a specific behavior or an activity that gives symbol to expression. It provides an experience, and it helps us express feelings and thoughts. There are numerous therapeutic values and properties that benefits to funerals. Helps you organize feelings. It helps you move and release and control. And when words aren't adequate, he says, we have ceremony. Now, if you can't go to funerals, if you didn't have one, you can redo them. You can light a candle. You can have a ceremony, plant a tree. If someone didn't choose a funeral service, I'm not here to say, oh, that was a wrong decision. But sometimes when we don't have any type of formal gathering or time to stop and honor a life, down the road, it gets hard that we didn't. And some people ask how to correctively do that. And you can do many creative things. I can't take the time today because that's not what this whole session is about, but I've had many experiences with this. The power of ceremony is it helps you begin to heal, and it's not closure at the end. It's a good beginning, and you deserve it, and so does the person who died. But the problem, again, is our culture. We have drive-through funeral homes, right, in our country. The ones in LA, they had a big billboard that says, for older people who can't get out of the car, you can just drive through. And that's how it started. And now there's billboards that say it's just simply for busy people, that you just drive through. You can sign the guest book. If there's an open casket or a viewing, the curtain opens, you can view the body. We have one in our state that it kind of creates a traffic problem when you drive through. So it's almost like a car wash with the timer. You only have 3 minutes to drive through. And so that clock ticks and you just kind of drive through. We've got a problem if we're not taking time to honor a life. And I said I'd share some things about kids for free. when families don't gather and don't talk about someone or remember them, it makes children sometimes think subconsciously, like if I died, no one would talk about me either. And so sometimes we think we're protecting kids or we're honoring grandpa's wishes. And again, I'm not saying that grandpa's wishes don't matter, but you can still do something to talk about them or to honor their life. Now, there is one cultural thing that I would get rid of that I think most bereaved people would agree with me is I would get rid of thank you notes. I don't know how that ever became a thing, that when families have such traumatic things happen, that then they feel this pressure of writing a thank you note. And sometimes they're pre-written by the funeral home, thank God, and you can just sign your name. But some families really feel this pressure to do these cards. And I tell people, when you give them a gift, if you give them a meal, if you give them a donation in memory of their person to an event, a scholarship, say, please do not send me a thank you. That is part of my gift to you. And some of you are probably listening going, oh, yes, I wish I did not have to do those thank you notes because they can become a burden. And if they're not a burden for you, that's okay too. But overall, I have found that many, many people find them very stressful. Another thing that factors in is the other people in your life, what support you have. Support must be ongoing. It really, really is needed. I used to think that if I asked people like, how many children do you have? Or how many people are in your family? And if they said, I have, 5 sisters, I think, wow, you have a lot of support. But that's not true. Just because someone's in your family tree does not mean they're available to you. So when you think about support, you have to ask the question, are they available to me? And then one of the things that I have people do is an assignment about their support system. And again, it's too long to get into, but we all need different people, right? You need a doer, a listener. You maybe need a spiritual care person. You need someone who's the funny friend that when you need your tank filled, you can call them. We are meant to live in community. I started this by saying National Geographic and these stories about how animals are so amazing and unique, but animals are very amazing to me because they live in community. They rely on each other. They look out for each other. The things that they do instinctively to keep each other warm, to gather food together, it amazes me. And we would be much better off as humans if we lived in that kind of community. Your own unique personality. Do you run from pain? Do you tackle it head on? People don't usually change in your grief. It's reflected. So if you were someone who was very expressive, very artsy, very creative, you're probably going to be that way in your grief. And if you weren't, you're not going to probably start doing that. If you had long-term problems with depression, it's still going to be a factor in your grief, and you have to be aware of that. The next factor is the personality of the person who died. What role did they play? Were they the decision maker, the funny one, the responsible one, the cook, whatever that is? Just kind of looking at what role they played in their life. And we process this very much as bereaved people because if you think about it, you always want to tell someone, especially with your child, what they were like, right? Oh, they were so this, and when they were little, they were this way, and they'd always, they were always so sensitive. Or when grandma came in the room, they always ran up and hugged her, and, whatever those things are, it's because there's just so much to miss and these beautiful things about their personalities. So I do not believe that we can talk about someone too much after they die. Isn't that all you really want to do is talk about them? That's why this podcast is so amazing, because people get to come on and talk about their person, not just about their death, but who they were. Find someone who will listen. And if you don't, reach out to Marcy or myself just to tell about that person's life, who they were, what their personality was like. And be sure to do that maybe sometime this week. A few other factors, and Marcy and I have done episodes on men in grief or families, is gender can come in. Men and women grieve differently. Men tend to be more physical and how they relate and connect to each other. And so there's many things with that. So I just want you to be aware. But the willingness to mourn transcends gender. There's too much emphasis on the differences and not enough on the capacity to grieve and to mourn, and we have that regardless of gender. Our cultural background factors in what our culture believes. Those rules and traditions of your culture guide you. They really do in how you handle grief. Europeans are far more expressive. They have ways of expressing. Your spiritual background, we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but it sends us into an emotional and spiritual kind of crisis when we experience a death. So we all want to search for meaning. We have to figure out what this means. What does your faith say to you, and how do you filter that? Another factor is other stresses in your life right now. Maybe you're going through a career change when this happened. Maybe you have an illness. Maybe there's a trial. Maybe you have something going on with your other children. Maybe you were moving. The more numerous and intense the other stresses in your life are, the more intense your grief may be. But now is the time to concentrate on your grief and not postpone it. Say, well, once I get settled in my new job, or once we move, or once this happens. If you have a lot of other stressors, you can still grieve. And I tell people you can schedule it. You can schedule it. Say on Tuesday nights, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some time to grieve, or this is my time. I often add this when I talk, and I just feel compelled to add this now when I talk about other stressors. One of the stresses that I've learned in my years of doing this that many people have that surprises them, that creates a very deep pain in their grief, is when others aren't there for them in the way they thought they would be. I call that relationship pain or relationship strain, when maybe your best friend doesn't call and ask how you're doing. Maybe at family gatherings, your family doesn't talk about your child. And that adds a whole layer of stress because you hate going to those events or being in their presence because they're just not honoring your grief, and they don't know what to do with you, and you have that relationship strain and pain. So that can factor in. I mentioned this last week when we were kind of talking about how we grew up or what experiences we've had with pain, but your experience with death and loss and pain in the past will affect how you grieve. And the last one is your own physical health. There's that lethargy of grief, the tiredness, the brain fog, poor eating. If you're fighting a disease or illness, you have to take care of yourself physically because it is something that you can control most of the time. To eat right, to sleep right, to move your body. So what I want to switch to after we gave some of that understanding of maybe some things that factor in for you. Some of you may say, wow, I had all 12 of those, or I didn't have very many. But each one of us have our own unique story. But I get asked all the time, how long does grief last? What stage am I in? We've heard these things, and I won't go too deep into it, but there's many different professionals who have different ways of describing grief, the tasks of grief, the needs of grief, the stages. But overall, there are some commonalities of what people need in grief. And it's something that we do subconsciously. We don't sit down and go, well, today I'm going to work on this part of my grief, or I'm going to do this. We usually jump around. We're usually doing more than one of the things that we need at one time. But what I want to tell you is what I'm going to give you now. Having the awareness of what bereaved people need makes you have an approach that says, I'm more active in this. I have an awareness. I'm a learner of this. I'm the student. I'm gaining what I need to go forward, rather than the people who passively just say, I'm going to sit back and just see what happens with grief. So there is an advantage to understanding this, to knowing this, that it gives us, an advantage. I mean, to say, I understand this. So again, I'm using Alan Wolfeld's 6 central needs of mourning. I have written some of my own and kind of tweaked it, and I'll add some of that in. But just for the sake for today, I'm just going to kind of go through these. The first one is to accept the reality of the loss, to believe that it really happened. It's something we know in our head, but not in our heart. And that 12-inch journey takes a while. And we just have to gently confront and look at what happened to us. It occurs over months and weeks. Sometimes you have to go, I can't do that. Not today. And other times you can pick it up and look at it. One of the most vital parts of this need is one of the most beautiful parts of my job and Marcy's is the retelling of the story. When you tell your story, and those who've done it on the podcast know how therapeutic it was. It's hard. It's very emotional. You wonder if you're going to make it through. You're wondering, why am I putting myself through this? Your friends and family are listening going, oh, but really when it's over, it feels so good to have that time to process, retell the story, both good and bad, talking it out. And again, one moment it's tolerable and the next moment it's not, that we have to be patient. And many times we feel like running or hiding. But please resist that. As you express what you're thinking and feeling outside of yourself, you're working on the need to believe that this really happened. The next one is letting yourself feel the pain of the loss. It's not something that we naturally want to do. No one says, oh, give me all the pain. I need to feel this. It's much easier to go, I don't want to go there, and to avoid it and just not have to deal with it at all. But confronting our pain reconciles ourselves to it. So we need to dose ourselves. You could not and should not experience all that at once. You have to just go, wait a minute. Maybe some days, because I think what happens if you don't dose it out, if a doctor gives you medicine, there's a dosing on it. You don't go and take all of it at once, and you don't just take it, you follow the instructions because you need it in the increments that it is prescribed. Well, grief is the same way. You don't have to go home and go, oh, Gwen said I have to work on this, so I'm just going to do it all today. You can't. You do it in little pieces over time as you are able to. But what happens is that it can zap our energy when we're looking at the pain of grief, when we are feeling the pain of it. Some of you know that complete and total exhaustion, the washed out, I can't do this. If our energy's low, then we're tempted to even run from our grief more. Like, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm just not going to do that ever again. But if we keep doing that and you start running, you may keep running and you don't heal. That's the risk that we take if we repress it too long. So what I'm saying to you is, dosing it is good. Denying it totally is not. So it's somewhere in the middle of just saying, okay. And I give this example, of running from our pain. Scooby and Shaggy, every episode, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy are running from a monster, and the monster gets bigger and bigger and scarier until they finally stop and look at it, right? At the end of the episode, they catch the person, they take the mask off, and they say, oh, it's you, Professor So-and-so. And Professor So-and-so is still there. They put him in the car, and, Daphne Friend and Velma all come up, and, the monster's still there, but they don't have to run from it. And the fear is a little less because they've looked at it. Well, your grief will get bigger and bigger and scarier until you look at it. Now, by looking at it doesn't take it away, but you don't have to run anymore because you're saying, this hurt me really bad, and I need to acknowledge that pain in order for me to heal. And it's hard when we live in the let's just be happy and move on and get over this, right, in our culture. That makes it very, very hard. Be careful not to feel the need to be too strong or in control. You're experiencing feelings at a very intense level that you never thought possible. And embracing it is actually foreign, right? There's a lot of things in grief that just feel so, one mother said, abysmally wrong. Just wrong. Can't make it right. That it's really hard. And in order to let yourself feel the pain, most of the time people think about tears. And I've mentioned that, like the wailing out and the crying. there's a lot of good information about tears, and there's different tiers of happy tears, and there's tiers of peeling an onion. And Dr. Fry, University of Michigan, in 1981, did a study on tears, put them under a microscope, and the makeup was different when they had peeled an onion versus tears of sadness. The tears of sadness included a toxic enzyme called enkephalin, and we need to get it out. So when someone says to you, what's wrong with you? Last week we used the word morb. I'm in a state of morb because I'm not myself. We also learned about anhedonia, the things that we used to find joy and pleasure and we don't. So you're living in anhedonia. And now you can say, I have a lot of enkephalin buildup. So I got to let that out because those are toxins. We need to find expression for feelings. Your feelings aren't wrong, they're information. It's what you do with them that can make them wrong, right? But find a way to get them outside of yourself. Someone said, if your eyes don't leak, your head swells. Finding a way to let that out. You can let that out with movement and dance and writing and verbalizing and smashing plates or going to a punching bag, screaming into a pillow. There's ways to do that. But what I also know, and the experts said, and Alan Wolfeld says this too, about encountering your pain, you have to nurture yourself. You have to be really gentle, physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, rest well, eat well, rest often, exercise, move your body. The pain of this will ebb and flow over months and years. Embracing it when it knocks you down requires a lot of support and care. That just reminded me, Marcy and I did a presentation a few years ago to medical students and doctors and medical society in the county in which she lives. And I was talking about the difference between curing and caring. Now, to cure someone, which was she's talked about this too, she was trained in, means to bring them back to the state of prior being, right? To bring them, to cure it, to get them to a place. And the word care means nurture, compassion, holding a space for. And bereaved people need care. And then when I talked about trauma last week, what we know about trauma is it demands, not suggests, it demands convalescence, that we convalesce. And convalescence means a place spelled in recovery. So think of a convalescent home where people go either to rehab if they've had a hip or knee replacement or whatever, the stroke, they go in rehab and they get better and they can go home. Or people may go to a convalescent or what we used to, nursing homes, whatever we call them now. They have nice, fancier names now. They go there until they die. But while they're there, they get fed, they're warm, they have all the therapies they need, they have people caring for them, and they are nurtured. I think to myself, man, I'd like to have a place that bereaved people could go. Wouldn't you like to have a place that right now someone would be feeding you, caring for you, doing all the things, all the therapies you need would be in that building, or coming right to your bedside and saying, let me help you until you are ready to be out on your own again? We need to care for bereaved people in a better way. Excuse me. Now, if you're waiting for that to happen, I haven't found a way to develop a convalescent place for all bereaved people. If you're waiting for someone to do that for you, what I've learned is they don't. And sadly enough, we're going to talk in our fourth session about how we have to do that for ourselves. Just a little insight, what's coming up. The next need is to remember the person who died. Do you think you have any relationship with someone after they die? Absolutely. Absolutely. We've talked about it so many times. The transition of the keepsakes and the memories and the linking, the things that we just have that we will always keep in our memory. We talk about them. Don't let anyone tell you to take your memories and not deal with them. Sell the house, keep busy, take down the photos. Ideas for memory books, collages, teddy bears they're made out of their clothes, jewelry. Some of you have thumbies. You have precious, precious things that help you remember that person who died. Again, not all memories are pleasant. Find someone who's judgment free that can help you work through if you've got some unpleasant memories that are preventing you from healing. Don't ignore that. Look at those as well. We don't want to suppress and carry underlying anger and sadness into our future. The next one is developing a new self-identity. We talked about this. Who am I now without this person? We have new roles to fill. This is why when we're trying to figure out what our family's like or what we're going through, that what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, that's why we hear things like keep decision making to a minimum, right? Don't do that, because you're trying to re-anchor yourself. And if you make a decision to move or to uproot or do something in that time before you're re-anchored, that can create other things. I just want to bring this up when I think about that decision making. And since it's on my head, I just say it, and maybe it was going to come up in the future. But when people talk about moving, and I had a friend whose son and daughter-in-law died in the same accident, and she said, I'm going to move. And I said, okay, can you teach me what moving looks like for you? And she said, well, they're just to start over and to have new memories. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing if you take the time, or if you were already talking about moving because you needed a different house, or you wanted to be in a different school district, like that plan was already in place. But she just said, no, I need to not have all those memories. And I said, you know what? That's just geography. You take those memories with you. What I think is maybe take some time to figure out your family's now, what you're like now, your identity, and keeping some of those decisions to a minimum, because your identity has been assaulted, and we need to develop renewed confidence in becoming more sure of our ability to cope, becoming aware of our critical thinking skills that can help us in this. Like many people in their new identity as a bereaved person have a heightened sense of more anxiety about more accidents happening, someone else, have, and it's hard for me because I don't want to push anyone's buttons, because I know there's every example and every story out there. So I'll use one that's a public story. Of a professor who speaks out in public. So he shared this story in front of, audiences. Dr. Hoy from Baylor University, he teaches at the medical school there. And he was driving, and he was in an accident where his best friend was in the front seat with him, and they picked up his best friend's wife, and they were on the way to pick up Dr. Hoy's wife and go to dinner. And they were rear-ended by a semi, and his best friend's wife died in the back seat. One of his parts of his new identity was the fact that he also was injured, and he had some cognitive things that he had to work through. So it changed. Will I ever be able to write a book again? Will I be able to be a professor? Who am I now? Because the accident also impacted him. But the other thing about learning your new identity is the anxiety of driving, or every time he saw a semi, and he'd have to use his critical thinking skills to say, not every semi hits people, and not every semi rear ends somebody. And so there's a lot of things that we have to learn and work through. I'll talk about this a little bit more next week, I promise, again. But it's just realizing that that's a need, that we have to work on these things. The next one is a search for meaning. What is my meaning going forward? Why did they have to die? We have to sort this through. And like I said, there are no answers. Death is, quite frankly, a part of life. But when it happens, we are never ready. It does not make sense. Oftentimes, our search for meaning is filtered through our spiritual beliefs. Recognizing that we do not and will not have all the answers is part of that. When I was going through infertility, I couldn't even read. So I got the audio book by Dr. James Dobson, When God Doesn't Make Sense, just to realize that it doesn't make sense. It's not going to make sense to Gwen that some people have a baby and put it in a dumpster or don't take care of it. And then some couple who wants a baby and is ready and can't have one. We have to search for that. And what does this mean? And sometimes we just come to conclusions that their suffering's over, or again, the conclusion may be like mine was, it just doesn't make sense. It's not going to for me. I have a couple examples written down here. I don't know. I'm laughing if they'll be helpful, but my mom is Greek. She's very expressive. I told you last week I was talking about, or maybe it was this week, about her growing up in kind of a difficult environment. And so she had to sleep between two sisters, and she'd say this was the crabby sister and the other one was the larger sweaty sister. And she said, you try growing up sleeping between those two. But her favorite sister, who she's very connected to, died suddenly. And it never made sense to her why God would take her. And she said she was doing so much good, and she was this and she was that. And it was several years later that my mom called me up and she said, I know why she had to die. And I said, who? She said her name. And I said, oh. And she said, she doesn't have to see what some things that are happening in her family. She doesn't have to see this world, like God protected her from all of that. And who am I to say, Mom, that doesn't make any sense? It's still, but for her, she just filtered it through that. And she could say, she found some peace to say, I'm glad she's not here to see what is happening. Okay. That was her search for meaning. I had one woman who, her husband died. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. One day she came into support group and she had a different kind of countenance and a piece about her. And she said she was reading in, forgive me, people, but I think it was in Ecclesiastes where it says, better is the day of a man's death than the day of his birth. And she said, it's my husband's better than day. So instead of calling it his death day, she called it his better than day. That may not bring comfort to you, but to her it did. But we all have to search for meaning. The last one is that we have to let people help us now and always. I've said it many times. We are not meant to do this alone. I talked about animals living in community. We need people. Compassionate Friends, which is a national organization. If you have a chapter near you, look it up. It is for bereaved parents who support each other. They have a national conference. I highly recommend their resources. But Compassionate Friends motto says, you need not walk alone. You cannot walk alone. As bereaved parents, they know. Can't do it. Cannot do it. If you had a broken leg or something's wrong with you physically, if you're in a wheelchair, people can see that. They can see you have needs. They hold the door for you. They say, oh, how are you doing? Or what happened? But when our heart's broken, over the years, especially, people don't see that. But you still need that support. You need people saying, what can I do? How can I hold the door for you? So keep talking, keep connecting, keep reaching out. And again, what I find is most of the time it's not with maybe people in our family tree or people in our life prior to the death, but oftentimes we're bereaved people. Our listeners say it all the time, find their support is with other bereaved parents. They get it. That's where I feel safe. That's where I can listen and talk. And the reason is that we are not meant to do this alone. So reviewing those needs again are, we need to believe that this really happened. And then the second part is letting yourself experience the loss, the pain of that. Remembering the person who died, the developing a new self-identity, the search for meaning, and needing others. I'd like you just in closing today to think about maybe some of those needs and where you might have to nurture and look at them. And so I would encourage you to do that. And as I said, your awareness of this and the approach that, hey, I'm going to look at this will benefit you. Rather than just going, you know what? Some people shut it off and said, I'm not going to listen. I'm not judging that. I understand that sometimes it's too much, but this stuff that we're learning is good for us. Thank you for being patient and listening. As mentioned last week, one of the things that Marcy and I were very pleased to do during this time of education, the month of February, is to offer a discount if you're interested in any of the programs that I have on my website at grief-guide.com. Now, don't buy anything on there because Marcy and I are extending some savings to you. If you would like to watch longer videos on grief, you're going to hear some of these stories, and some will be new, things will be added, but there is a lot of handouts, added readings that you can do. You don't necessarily have to do them, but they're available for people who want them. I also offer 3 checkpoints for you to meet with me individually. It doesn't matter where you live. We can do it virtually. And those are 3 sessions where we look at the wound, what happened to you, the work that grief requires, and then the wonder. I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder what my family's going to look like. I wonder how I'm going to heal. I wonder whatever you're wondering. So we've offered them at discount savings. We will email you how to log on and to get that savings in a coupon. And then if you want to bundle both, you want to watch the videos and you want to meet with me, we have a bundling issue or package as well. So you would email either one of us and we would send you how to access the discount. Lastly, I want to say that some people are further in their journey and they do want to help others. And if that's you, I do have a couple other things that help people in their grief. I have a grief mentor training. Full disclosure, that was filmed at a church. It's very faith-based, but still very helpful. It comes with a 38-page workbook on helping you explore how to help other people and why you could do it and if you're ready to do it. And then I also have many bereaved people. Some of the listeners have reached out and said, I want to gather with some moms at my library. I want to start a support group. You said we need support and there's nothing in my community, so I'm going to start it, but I don't know where to start. And I would get that all the time. So I developed a year-long weekly support group with suggestions of what to do and for the group. And so that's available too. So explore if you have questions, but reach out to us before you purchase so we can pass along the specials to you. And again, thank you for listening. And we'll be back next week to talk about some of the obstacles or big emotions in grief: anger, guilt, depression, loneliness, staying too busy, some of the things that we get caught up in doing. Take care.